Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
So I want to talk about ContraPoints, a popular YouTuber. She has gotten herself in trouble on Twitter yet again. So most of you guys probably know who ContraPoints is, but she is a YouTuber who kind of came to prominence in the 2016 era Trump administration, kind of explaining 4chan culture and online trans culture, as well as online anti-trans culture, to a very wide audience. Big videos with a lot of production going into them and a big audience, some of which might be already into that sort of thing, and a lot of people who might not. I do think ContraPoints is one of the rare examples of somebody who has explained trans and progressive ideas and culture to people who are not usually open to that sort of thing or don't really understand it well. So I think there was a while there where she was having a palpable and positive impact on the culture. However, Twitter has always been an issue, and she will just kind of go on rants on there or going through these phases where she's just tweeting random shit, which is always fun to do, except somehow she always gets herself mired in these progressive controversies, gets a bunch of people on the left mad at her, and then she's kind of just like, what? And then she disappears for a while. And so she's been less relevant over the last few years. She still makes videos. She still puts a lot of production into her videos and has a lot of patrons. So her videos have pretty decent budgets, and she's still good at doing it. However, I think her style of commentary and her sort of place on the political spectrum has become a little bit less relevant. And I think this recent controversy is kind of an example of that. So what happened is, I think people started pointing out and complaining about the fact that ContraPoints has not said much about the Gaza and Israel conflict and the genocide in Gaza. And so there was a little bit of talk like that. And there's always talk and chatter of people hating on ContraPoints. I've seen that going back years, which is why it probably always was best course for her to just avoid Twitter entirely, because all she's ever done is stoke those sort of scattered embers against her. In response to that, I believe she was responding to some of the kind of vague criticisms that were out there. And what she said was that she feels what's happening in Gaza is not particularly unique. So there are essentially many versions of this that have happened in the modern era. And, essentially what she's saying is, unfortunately, what's happening in Gaza is not that unique. And she cites the 60,000 number, which is being passed around as the number of civilians or the number of people killed in Israel's war on Gaza. I don't believe that number. I think that is definitely a gross underestimate. It seems to come from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is, the only source of information on that sort of thing. And often Israeli sources and people who are hateful and don't want truth to come out about what's happening in Gaza will say that the Gaza Health Ministry is run by Hamas, and so it's not reliable. But in this case, it seems pretty clear to me that they're undercounting. There's no way the amount of death and wanton attacking of civilians that we've seen over the course of the last year to 2 years only amounts to 50,000 deaths with both combatants and civilians combined. I absolutely do not believe that. But ContraPoints uses that figure and says that this is not a particularly unique thing that's happening. And I don't believe that she's trying to downplay it, but she's trying to say that this is not, that's why I haven't focused on it. And so people got upset at her for saying that, because it definitely comes off like her saying that she's downplaying it. But it's pretty clear that Gaza and that particular development politically is not really what she's most interested in. So the pushback against her initial statement on Twitter led her to making this statement on Reddit. And it's a long statement, and I don't know why she said this on Reddit, I have to be honest. I don't know. You guys will have to tell me what's going on Reddit. I mean, is Reddit just becoming kind of like a liberal Zionist like honeypot? It seems like I've noticed that a lot of the pro Ethan Klein activity seems to come from Reddit. And all of these platforms definitely have their own little echo chambers that happen. I don't know. I mean, has Contra been spending a lot of time on Reddit? That just seems kind of out of nowhere, but maybe that's an indication of something. But anyway, just to read a little bit of this statement. She said that leftists feel betrayed because she hasn't made a video about Palestine. She questions, do people actually want a ContraPoints video about Palestine where she, pours milk on a mannequin of Benjamin Netanyahu, and says no, that she's posted about it and she's given money to Palestinian aid. But essentially she doesn't feel like it makes sense to kind of make entertainment out of the Gaza issue. And I guess she doesn't see a way to fit that into her, usual programming. And so she goes through a couple of her thoughts on the state of discourse when it comes to Palestine. And she starts by saying that it was clear what was going to happen after October 7th, which is true. And the sentiment amongst people who felt threatened by that attack was one of panic and also a lust for revenge, which she points out. And she said something odd that the first thing that I don't agree with that she said was it was not politically feasible at this point to withdraw aid to Israel on a time frame that would make a difference. That's an odd statement. It's one thing to say that withdrawing aid right away before Israel did what they did politically was probably unfeasible. Something was going to happen in response to what Hamas did. But to say that there's no way that any type of political that anything different could have happened politically in a time frame that would have made a difference, I disagree with that. I mean, at any point this could have stopped. It's just a matter of the right political pressure being applied in the right way. And it is clear at this point that the influence of AIPAC on politicians is so powerful that yes, even with enormous unrest and pressure, they're still not acquiescing. But I would argue that's more because of sort of liberals in the media space and throughout the sort of institutions of society that have provided a lot of cover for Israel and Zionism and the Zionist project. But to say that at no point between then and now could any political pressure or political situation have made a difference? At no point was it feasible for us to withdraw aid. I don't agree with that. So she might be just referring to that initial period, but it doesn't really seem like that. It seems like she's kind of painting with a broad brush here and using that as a reason to say that all of what has happened between Israel and Gaza was inevitable. So then she moves on to essentially the same critique that people like Ethan Klein make of the pro-Palestine movement, which is that leftists quickly decided that their goal was not opposition to genocide, but opposition to Zionism. And then says that makes things tricky because it's a broad category. She says most Jews are Zionists, which is not necessarily true. And she said that anyone who supports a two-state solution is a Zionist. That is also not necessarily true. To say that there must be a two-state solution is not necessarily to say that the apartheid state of Israel needs to be upheld. Those are two different issues. You could argue that there's no such thing as a two-state solution without Israel being a purely Jewish state or a predominantly purposely Jewish state. But I would say that Zionists and pro-Israel voices are the ones who are saying that a two-state solution without Israel being a predominantly Jewish state is not an option. So that's kind of the problem here, is not that there's no solution where people can live together on that land. It's that Zionists and many Israelis do not seem to want a society that includes Arabs or Palestinians. And that's kind of the point of the whole Zionist project. So yes, that is an issue. If people are comfortable living under the conditions of the ethno-state that currently exists and the apartheid state that currently exists in Israel, then they're going to be resistant to the idea that that needs to change. And there are many people in Israel who fear that the idea that their society should be more inclusive to Arabs is the same as saying that they should be hunted and killed by Arabs and that society should be more friendly to anti-Semitic violence. That's not true at all. I don't feel like I'm the one who should decide whether a one-state solution or two-state solution is the answer, but I do think that Israel existing as an apartheid state is a non-tenable position. And it does seem like ContraPoints kind of goes through a lot of gymnastics here to arrive at the conclusion that Israel is an apartheid state. It is as it is, and trying to change that is a doomed project that only opens the door to anti-Semitism. So it's not that hard to see how that position services actual bigoted Zionism. She says that the term Zionist and being against Zionism, as opposed to the genocide that's taking place in Gaza, is too vague of a term. It's ambiguous, and it opens the door towards people who already use phrases like Zionist occupied government and other dog whistles to express their anti-Semitism. People that really don't care about Palestine, do not care about justice for Palestinians. What they care about is stoking anti-Semitic hate. And yes, those people are out there, but at the end of the day, the goal is not to stoke anti-Semitic hate. The goal is to stop the genocide in Gaza. And yes, Zionism is the ideology that has paved the way for that. So, I mean, I do think it's important for people in the pro-Palestine movement to distance themselves and separate themselves from anti-Semitism. And like, yes, it's there. But at the same time, I don't appreciate this idea that we get from ContraPoints or Ethan Klein, that we have to set aside the urgency of Gaza and what's happening there and talk about the rise of anti-Semitism. First of all, while I'm sure that that is the case, because hate crimes do spike in response to things like this, and that is a measurable pattern in America and across the world. But also, you know, the definition of what constitutes a hate crime and an anti-Semitic incident has changed. So obviously, these numbers that we're seeing about that are being inflated by that. And that's not to excuse anybody who's going out and being anti-Semitic or being violent towards Jews or even just saying racist things towards Jews. There's no excuse for any of that. But at the end of the day, focusing on that is kind of cover for the fact that Zionism is a very real ideology that has gone unchecked and has allowed for the slaughter of Palestinians because it has allowed for the dehumanization of Palestinians. Whatever lack of safety Jews are feeling because of rhetoric against Zionism or Israel, it pales in comparison to the dehumanization that is faced by Palestinians. And that's really what this entire thing comes down to, is the power dynamic between Israel and Gaza and Palestinians. It's completely outsized. And so, yes, there's violence that comes from the Palestinian side and Hamas, but these are people who have had every possible means of political resistance taken away from them. And every leader that they've had that wanted to foster negotiations and peaceful solutions was assassinated by Israel. Israel has purposely created the conditions where their enemy is trapped and panicking and violent, because that is the easiest enemy for them to attack and create propaganda against. So she goes on to criticize the sort of echo chambers that have made people extremely mad about what they're seeing in Gaza, but with no real political outlet, and said that some of the extreme anger that is stoked in that type of environment does seep out into sentiments towards Jews. I don't know that that's true. I see what she's saying. Like, a lot of these things are like logically, rhetorically true, but is it literally true? Does it make sense? Like, you're talking about people who are watching videos of people being blown to bits every day, and yet we're talking about this sort of hypothetical idea of anti-Semitism in response to this, and there are a few isolated incidents that you can point to. It's just not helpful commentary. It's honestly not. And so maybe it is good to have some voices that are piping up to say, hey guys, we need to remember to talk about anti-Semitism as well, because like if we lose sight of that, we are going to allow too many anti-Semites to feel comfortable in this movement, and that is going to become a problem. That's valid. I think that voice needs to be there. But ultimately, the criticism of Contra here is that you have an enormous voice, one of the biggest voices, if not the biggest voice, on left-wing YouTube, or at least for a while she was, and yet you've said almost nothing about this. And I think it's valid for her to say that her style of content doesn't lend itself to this type of discussion. I mean, it's not the easiest thing to talk about. But honestly, do we really want a ContraPoints video about Israel-Palestine? Yeah. I mean, I think if ContraPoints took a pro-Palestinian perspective or just talked about the origins of the conflict and how things came to be where they're at with an honest lens, that would be great. That's exactly what we need, is people describing this stuff in extreme detail. And if she did it, it would reach so many fucking people. But what that would require is a real deep dive into the issue. And that is going to require a certain angle. Like, how are you going to dig into this? Are you going to dig into it from the side that talks about Palestinians and what they've experienced ever since the start of the Zionist project? Or are you going to take the Ethan Klein approach and you're going to talk about sort of what the Israeli perspective is on this and the reason that Israelis are worried about Arabs and worried about terror attacks and, you know, feel that that dissolving the borders of Israel is a non-starter because it means violence against them. But either way, you've got to pick one, because there's really no way, once you drill down to that level, there's no way to two sides this. And it seems like that's what she's unwilling to do, because she could easily drill into the history of this and make a great video about it. And that is aligned with the kind of stuff that she does. But, you know, she doesn't feel strongly enough about it. And she also mentions people who, you know, the contingent of people who didn't want to vote for Democrats or support Democrats, which kind of led to the position that we're at now. 0 Palestinian lives were saved by all of the unrest towards Democrats and the refusal to vote for Democrats. Not one fewer bomb or bullet was fired by the IDF. And she said because Trump is a menace to her personally and everyone she cares about in the fact that she's trans, that she does feel some bitterness about that, admittedly, and that's part of it. Which is odd. I mean, I don't believe she's saying there that means she's against the cause, but she's saying that the people who are loudest in advocating for that cause, in her view, have shot themselves in the foot and done nothing that actually has contributed to change in that cause. And that, combined with the fact that we are now in a much worse situation all around politically, makes her bitter. And I think there's some validity to that, but also she's kind of making the liberal mistake of the moment. The reason that liberal Democrats have completely lost any semblance of a hold on the culture and the political conversation that they had is failure to recognize how seismic this issue of Israel-Palestine is for the current generation and the current political moment. Kamala Harris and her team made this miscalculation, and in my view, it cost them the election. I don't think it was the only thing, but I think it was huge. I think it was a way bigger reason that Kamala lost the election than people realize. Because I could see it. I spoke on this as the election was coming up, that, you know, I thought if Kamala Harris didn't make the right moves on that issue, it would be the decisive factor of whether she lost the momentum that she had when she initially came into the race. When she came into the race, there was a lot of possibility about what kind of candidate she could be, what kind of president she could be. And she rode that for a second. And it was the DNC speech, refusal to let a Palestine speaker at the DNC, refusal to say anything about her speech, this thing about the deadliest military in the world. That was when she lost her momentum. And then from there, she just went on to parrot the Biden administration line over and over again, working tirelessly for a ceasefire. People didn't buy that shit, and she lost a ton of votes because of it. And I think Contra's kind of making the same mistake here, where she wants to acknowledge the depth and the depravity of this issue. She wants to acknowledge that, you know, the feeling of some people who are progressive in some ways, but have not brought themselves to be fully on board with the pro-Palestine cause, you know, have some valid concerns about anti-Semitism in the movement or what the movement actually means for Israel, Israelis, and Jews. So she's trying to be a balanced voice and a clarifying voice on the matter, and yet not truly understanding the gravity of what it means to a lot of people to watch Israel doing this in such brazen fashion and to not be stopped by anybody. And the vast majority of this violence has taken place under Democrats. under a Democratic president who could have stopped this at any time. This idea that there was no way to stop what Israel did and is continuing to do is a cop-out. It really is. She cops out early on in this statement and then uses the rest of it to talk about kind of left-wing rhetoric that she disagrees with. And while that is quite in line with what ContraPoints has always done, and that's why she's built such a large audience, is by talking about people's rhetoric, I also think that she, this idea of that what we're seeing in Palestine is not unique and it's not anything that hasn't happened before, and that's why she hasn't talked about it that much. It's enormously cynical, and it does fail to recognize the uniqueness of that particular issue. And in many ways, Palestine and the oppression of Palestine has been at the center of global tensions for the last 25 years and more. Going back to 9/11 and our invasion of the Middle East and all of the instability that has happened since then. So much of it is tied to Israel and Palestine and the interests of Israel. I never know what the right place to put this in there is, but Tim Walz stood on the stage, the debate stage, in 2024 and said the expansion of Israel and its proxies is imperative to the United States. The expansion. This was our progressive champion, the guy that everyone was hyped that Kamala chose because it meant that she was going in a direction that your average progressive or populist could get on board with. And that was what he said about Israel. That indicates a real problem. And it does indicate the type of entrenchment that she's talking about. But to not at least relate to the frustration and the hatred toward Democrats from a progressive and left-wing perspective because of that is burying her head in the sand in the same way that the rest of the liberal establishment did. And, ContraPoints gets criticized because she did something with Hillary Clinton or something like that. I don't know. I want to say that I think ContraPoints still has a lot of merit as a content creator. I don't think she has bad intentions. This direction I'm seeing from her is not promising in terms of staying on the pulse of what the progressive movement and what the humanitarian movement and the human rights movement is focused on. And, anybody who's going to be a real effective left-wing or progressive voice has to be keeping their ear to that. And, pushing back in some areas is valid, but if you're going to position yourself against that, that's when I think you're dooming yourself, because who are you on the side of? Who? Ethan Klein? That's your friends now? Okay, good luck on Reddit then. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews. I'm reading Catcher in the Rye right now. I'm probably going to review that on there. Also posting music early. I've got a couple EPs out that were available first for members only. Right now, there's a couple tracks on there. There's a freestyle by me and my buddies Wrecked and Psych. So if you want access to all that, different podcasts and other stuff, become a member. And if there's other kinds of content that you'd like to see for members only stuff, then let me know and we'll work some things out.